state of California is doing to you. So anybody who's not reached their depression threshold yet, I'm here to make sure we get there. My name is Chris Linneman. I'm with Summers Engineering, and we are the managing entity of the Westside San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition for the compliance with the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. That's a mouthful. Just real quick, how many here are growers? Okay, how many here are growers in San Luis Canal Company or CCID? Okay, you guys in Firebaugh? Okay. I guess Columbia Canal Company would be another one. Firebaugh is actually not part of the Westside Coalition, but we work pretty closely with them. Okay, quick overview. I'm going to cover what has happened over the last irrigation cycle based on what our monitoring results were, and talk about the new requirements of the long-term program that has just been enacted. The nuts and bolts of the Westside Coalition was we're on the west side of San Joaquin River, more or less from Mendota to Tracy. We are district managed, meaning we don't generally have a lot of individual growers like some of the other coalitions do. We run through the districts and let the districts interact with you guys. You guys don't want to talk to me anyway. Probably much rather deal with the guys at the district that you're used to talking to. Our purpose is really to help growers comply with the Irrigated Lands Program and keep the Regional Water Quality Control Board talking to us rather than talking to you. And then we manage the monitoring reports for both the Irrigated Lands Program and the San Joaquin River TMDO program for chlorpyrifos and diazinon. So if any of you guys endured my talk last year, you might notice that this map looks a little bit different. With the new regulatory program, we've got a new map. So before we came up here and kind of more or less paralleled Interstate 5, the new map has actually expanded us all the way up into the coastal range for all the people who farm in the foothills, I guess. In any case, they told us that's what our map's going to look like, so that's what our map looks like. Mine did. So we've expanded up here. The grassland drainage area for you guys who farm in Firebaugh Canal Water District or Pinoche or Pacheco, they are now going to be part of their own coalition. Summers Engineering will help manage that as well, but for the moment they're separate from Westside Coalition. And then anybody here from Westlands, you guys are in your own coalition down there. The basics of the Irrigated Lands Program applies to everybody, so a lot of this stuff doesn't really matter who you're dealing with. The monitoring program covers it covers 18 tributary monitoring sites, 3 sites on the San Joaquin River, and 1 site on the Delta Mendota Canal. The tributary sites are like Salt Slough, Pozo Slough, Los Banas Creek. We have 2 sites on Los Banas Creek, 2 sites on Salt Slough, one at Sand Dam, and then another one up here at Lander Avenue, Mud Slough. And then there's a whole bunch further up north that probably doesn't affect most of you guys unless anybody farms up in Del Puerto or Patterson or in areas like that. So for now, I'm mostly going to stick with talking about monitoring results around the Salt Slough area, which it would affect most of the growers around here. We test monthly for pesticides, general chemistry, aquatic toxicity, and then we test twice a year for sediment toxicity. That's essentially we take the water, we take the mud, we expose it to critters. If the critters die, it's toxic. If they don't die, it's not toxic. It's a lot more complicated than that, but trust me, you really don't want to hear it. The report results are summarized in a thick and very boring report that is sent to the regional board twice a year. And then when we have areas that have chronic problems, like up here in Hospital Creek and Wesley Wasteway, and down here at Salt Slough, Sand Dam, and Pozo Slough, that we have chronic detections of pesticides or we have toxicity hits, we have to develop these management plans. And some of you guys may have gotten little survey forms from me asking about what management practices you use. We summarize that and send it in a neat report and tell the regional board what we're going to do differently to reduce the water quality problems. So here's some 2012 and 2013 water quality results. This is coalition-wide, so this covers all of our monitoring sites. 2012, water flea toxicity, that's just a little bug that goes in the water. We had 2 hits in 2012. We had 8 hits this past year. Algae toxicity was 11, that went down to 2, so that's kind of good news. Ammonia is kind of a separate issue. Chlorpyrifos, diazinon, malathion, and then to a lesser extent diuron. These guys are the red-headed stepchild of the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And when we have numbers that are 7, which is pretty bad, going up to 12, and then diazinon going from 0 in 2012 to 8 in 2013. These are measurements of exceedances. That catches the eye of the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and then certain people within there start thinking, well, maybe we should go talk to Dow and tell them they can't sell these materials on the west side anymore. That conversation hasn't happened outside of private conversations, but it has been brought up a couple times, and it's something that I think you growers ought to take seriously, because I don't think you want to see those tools taken away from you. Malathion is on this list mostly because there's a prohibition of discharge, which means if it's detected at all, it's an exceedance. In terms of actual environmental harm, it probably is the least of the concern. But if it is found in the waterways, if it's found in the in any of the creeks, Pozo Slough, the drains, or in the San Joaquin River, it's a bad thing. Diuron is an herbicide. Everybody and their grandmother uses it, including Caltrans and the railroad companies. And I've actually watched the railroad companies with their big spray booms sitting out, drive right over Del Puerto Creek and not stop spraying right over the creek. I don't know for a fact they were spraying Diuron, but they were spraying, and I take samples on that creek, so that's not a good thing. Looking more closely at Salt Slough, we have a monitoring site here at Pozo Slough, which is where Pozo Slough starts in CCID and then goes into San Luis Canal Company. It's right at the border. Salt Slough at Sand Dam is kind of a conglomerate of a lot of drains, including Pozo Slough, and then further down we have Salt Slough at Lander Avenue. These are in what's called a focus management plan. We're mostly looking at chlorpyrifos, diuron, and aquatic toxicity. So we're talking algae toxicity and water flake. Yes?
You don't have pyrethroids listed on there.
We don't have pyrethroids because we don't test pyrethroids in the water column. And that is actually a technical issue. Pyrethroids are toxic at really, really tiny amounts, what would be parts per trillion. And the technology to test that in the water column just isn't very reliable. And when we did do it from about 2006 to 2008, we spent a whole lot of money and we couldn't get any detections. Now, laboratories will tell you that if they introduce pyrethroids in clear water and they test it, they can find it. And that's probably true, but keep in mind that the water I pull out of the creek isn't exactly what I'd want to drink. It's muddy, it's full of all sorts of other stuff. It's chemically, it's highly complicated, and there's just lots of interferences, and the technology's not that good. We do test pyrethroids in the sediment, and I'll get to that in a bit. Pyrethroids are tied mostly, in the stuff we've seen, mostly to killing our sediment critters, and they certainly do cause issues. But in the Salt Slough area, we've had a little bit of sediment toxicity. It's Pozo Slough at Indiana Avenue, and we've had a little bit at Salt Slough at Sand Dam. I don't think we've ever had any at Salt Slough at Lander Avenue, which means if the pyrethroids are causing sediment toxicity problems, it's dropping out early. That's a good thing. The pesticide and toxicity since March 2011, and this is just again for that Salt Slough area. We're looking at Pozo Slough, Salt Slough at Sand Dam, Salt Slough at Lander Avenue, and then for comparison, the San Joaquin River at Lander and the San Joaquin River at Sac Dam. Pozo Slough really kind of seems to be a little bit ugly. Salt Slough at Sand Dam to a lesser extent. Again, looking at the chlorpyrifos and the diazinon. So we can look at the good news part of it is when we look at chlorpyrifos and diazinon from Salt Slough at Sand Dam on, pretty good stuff. A lot of goose eggs, which is a good thing. When we kind of look on the darker side of things, Pozo Slough is pretty ugly all the way across, but again, only one sediment toxicity hit since 2011, so that's what 6 tests. That's kind of good news. I mean, we don't want to see toxicity. That toxicity causes us to do things which causes us to spend money and write thick reports, and it causes you guys to change what you're doing. Again, the diuron kind of across the board. Chlorpyrifos and diazinon, mostly over in Pozo. Malathion, again, it's a problem only because we can't discharge it at all. But the water flea toxicity here is a little bit on the high side. Looking more at total detections for the whole watershed, we started out 2008, 2009, almost 14 detections in 2008 at chlorpyrifos, and a fair number in 2009. 2010, we started doing our management plan, and you can see things got a lot better, which means you guys changed your habits, changed the way you did things, and it improved. And that's the kind of story we need to be able to tell to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, as well as the environmental groups that are pushing to can this program and make things very difficult for us. From here, I want to shift away from data and talk about the new waste discharge order that was just adopted. In January, we shifted from the old program, which was mostly focused on surface water monitoring and pushing management plans on growers, to a more expanded program. Since the drought doesn't completely wipe this out, we're going to pile more regulations on top of you. The surface water program is more or less the same. There is a new groundwater program, which is going to require us to do groundwater monitoring, mostly for nitrogen and salt, but to a lesser extent, a handful of pesticides that don't get filtered out. And then there's going to be a lot more grower involvement on your end. There's going to be more paperwork and more forms that you need to fill in. And I have some examples of that. I tried to push real hard back on this stuff because I think it's largely a bureaucratic waste of time, but it's pretty much a case where the Regional Water Quality Control Board has the stick, and all we can really do is take the beating. So as far as the new requirements, there's a groundwater assessment to determine vulnerable areas, which is kind of this vaguely defined term where if it's an area that has got a nitrogen exceedance, or an area that is known to be have high permeability, it's going to be a vulnerable area. At a quick look at the data, particularly compared to like Kings County or some parts of the eastern San Joaquin Valley, we don't seem to be hit super hard with that. There's not a lot of wells that at the moment look like they're going to violate the nitrogen threshold, but there's a lot of well data and we haven't looked at all of it yet. We're just starting to dig into that now. As I mentioned, we're looking for mostly nitrogen, salts, and then certain pesticides. The major requirements for the growers is you're going to have to all confirm membership. Is anybody in the East Side Coalition? Because they've been running on the new program for a little bit. So you've got your little membership number, and you've had to. They haven't given that to you yet?
No, but that's me.
Okay, well it's coming. But essentially, you're going to have to fill out a form that says, yes, I am part of the West Side Coalition. Your guys that are in the high vulnerability groundwater areas, which we haven't determined yet, you're going to have to develop a nitrogen management plan. We got a little bit of time on that. We're talking about it a little bit more than a year before we have to worry about that. And we've developed a template for that. It's not terrible. So it's mostly filling out a form and developing a nitrogen application plan and what they're calling a mass balance system, which I think is highly exaggerated, but we'll get to that later. Farms with the potential to discharge sediment. This is a bigger problem further north where we have sediment and we have a lot of pyrethroid application. It seems to be a lesser of an issue down here with the heavier soils, but if we have the ability to discharge sediment or we have a site that's got a known sediment problem, you're going to have a sediment control plan that you've developed and you keep on site, and then you're going to have to attend at least one annual meeting and implement management practices that have been deemed appropriate for the issues. Here's part of, and I've kind of cut some of these forms up. We don't need to read them all out loud, but this is kind of what the whole farm evaluation plan, which I actually left off the list. Every grower is going to have to develop and submit a farm evaluation plan, which is going to talk about your pesticide application practices, your crop fertility plan, whether or not your farm has the ability to discharge sediment. And by the way, we're not leading the witness here. The right answer on this is not always no. If you can discharge sediment, and you mark no, and then they form a boundary of this watershed that says you can discharge sediment, they might come back and ask, well, why did you say no? So, we'll help with that part, but we want to kind of fill this stuff up in an honest fashion. More field-specific stuff, you're talking about the field ID, the crop, the acres of the field, the crop, whether it is high vulnerability for surface water, meaning does it have the ability to discharge tailwater, or is it high vulnerable to groundwater? Are you in an area that's nitrogen impacted or known to percolate water quickly? What kind of irrigation methods are you using if you've got a primary or secondary irrigation method? Irrigation efficiency practices, laser leveling, use of VT, use of the pressure bomb or pressure chamber. I hadn't actually heard it called a pressure bomb before. And then nitrogen management methods here. So what this little template here is doing, it's covering all of our required forms in one packet. The idea is it's going to make it really easy for you guys to fill it out and turn it in so that I can send my poor intern to go through all this data and summarize it, and I go through interns really fast, and summarize it and send it in with the report. We won't send these in individually, at least right now. There was some push for it, and we kind of came back as one, why do you need it individually? You're not going to look through it. It's going to be binders and binders of data. And two, let's just summarize it and stick it in there. We can summarize it by watershed, and then if you need to look at something specific, come to us, and we'll work with the grower at the district, trying to insulate the regional board from you guys so you guys can farm, and we can deal with the joy of bureaucratic red tape. Irrigation well information is part of the new groundwater program. They're looking for wellhead protection practices, and if wells are abandoned, are they properly abandoned? Right now, this is kind of, think of it as an inventory. Nobody's asking you to do anything, but if they go out in areas that are high vulnerable and they see a lot of unprotected wellheads or a lot of improperly abandoned wells, writing's going to be on the wall that sooner or later somebody's going to start knocking on doors and say, okay, we need to start doing management practices to improve wellhead or properly abandoned wells. In a year like this where guys are calling Myers Brothers and saying, hey, I'd like to get on your well drilling list, probably a good idea to just build the wellhead properly from the get-go. Do it right the first time, save yourself a headache later. And the last part of this is the sediment erosion practices and irrigation practices and cultural practices for managing sediment and erosion. You notice they're all check boxes. They're set up so that we can upload it into a database, form a real quick summary, shoot it off in a nice pretty table, and carry on with our lives. Ultimately, we may put this online. I don't know how many people would be interested in filling this online rather than mailing something in? Okay. Well, it'd be easier on me, but there was a real big push. The regional board had this idea that we put all this stuff online. You guys pull out your iPhone and you fill it out while you're driving your tractor. And I had to explain to the director there that that's not generally how farmers work. But in any case, we're going to have to submit this material. There's not much I can do to delay it anymore. We are I'm trying to remember what the date was. And I think it's coming up. Yeah, I think it's April 2015. Probably should have put it at the end again. Yeah, so the sod farm evaluation plan, which is the first part of that form I showed you, is December 2014, and then the rest of the stuff will come in 2015. So. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts of the program as it stands now. Anybody have any questions? Sure.
Yeah, so in the geographic areas where you're getting more exceedances, who studies from there? I mean, is it a cropping thing for that year, or is that
it seems to be, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, the worse the water supply conditions, the more exceedances I get. Because any inch of reusable water is not leaving the farm. Anything that does come out is pretty heavily, I don't want to say polluted, but it's got a lot of goo in it, a lot of sediment in it. So where I have a lot of exceedances, like up here in Hospital Ingram Creek, it's a real narrow area, highly erodible soils, really steep ground. So I get a lot of sediment coming out, and that carries with it anything that likes to stick to the sediment, like the pyrethroids, chlorpyrifos, to a lesser extent diazinon. And then because the ground is so steep, it's harder to control tailwater, so we do have a lot more exceedances up there. So when I have one exceedance, we go out and we say, hey, we had an exceedance. A whole battery of exceedances, which is what we've had in Hospital and Ingram Creek, we form the management plan. We get the list of all the growers in that sub-watershed. We talk to them, tell them, okay, here's the issue that we're seeing. We've got chlorpyrifos showing up, in March and June, when you put it on before planting or right with planting, and then you're at the June or July, usually alfalfa spray. So we need to do better tailwater control in those times. What can we do to improve irrigation practices? What I don't want to do is go to the regional board and say the exceedance was June 15th and these 6 growers applied chlorpyrifos 2 to 4 weeks before that time. I'm not interested in pointing the finger at anybody. Quite frankly, I don't think it moves the needle. If I have somebody, and this is not, it's not happened yet, but I've heard a couple guys get frustrated with the program. If I have somebody who says, I'm just not going to participate in your program, I'm going to do what I want, I'm not going to let that individual cost this entire watershed to spend $20,000 or $30,000 on a management plan and new enforcement because one guy's refusing to cooperate. At that point, I will say, well, we have an issue, and I'm going to pass it off to regional board for enforcement. But for the most part, I want to be reaching out to growers. I want the growers aware of what the issues are, and pay closer attention to what they're doing. I mean, when we have like the salt slough graph, when you start talking to growers, we have these management plans. We go from 14 exceedances down to 4. That's good news. Now, the regional board wants that 4 to go to 0, but I can't go to 0 without passing through the smaller numbers. Any other questions?
Yeah. In 08 and 9, you showed here, and then you went all the way down to 10 on their graph. Where do they? I know they want it to be at 0, but if we're under 4 there, like in 2013, is that acceptable, or is that just still a red flag?
No, it's the way the rule goes is a management plan is required when there is more than 1 exceedances. I don't know why they just didn't say there's 2, but so once you hit 2, and we're through here. This one here, this triggers the management plan.
That's what I'm saying. You know,
So we try, management plan comes in here. This one here, this is at 1. So, and I think it's in 3 or more years. So right here, we've hit the diazinon threshold. But there is, if you think about it in terms of approaching the non-farming community, the Friends of the River or NRDC, and you're going to have to look them in the face and say, well, it's okay for me to discharge these pesticides in the river as long as it doesn't exceed it more than once. Now, I like the term exceedance always gives me a chuckle because, yeah, the exceedance is a number that they give you. For chlorpyrifos, it's 0.015 parts per billion. Okay, my detection limit's 0.014. So if I detect it, it's an exceedance. That being said, some of these detections, and I didn't put any data up there, have been like, 0.4. So we're orders of magnitude greater than the threshold. So that's, at that point, it's really tough to make the argument, well, this is okay, because it's just not going to fly. There's no point. So what we need to do is, when you've got alfalfa that you're spraying, get a tailwater pond in there, capture that tailwater and reuse it, or get it to somebody else who's going to reuse it, or get it into, I don't know if Alejandro wants this water, but get it into San Luis Canal Company's irrigation system, but don't get it into Pozo Slough, And not to point it out, but we test on the 2nd Tuesday of the month. So, the 2nd Wednesday is a great day to spray.
Camera's still on.
Yeah, I caught that.
Public knowledge. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.